Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Marius Roodt, who has managed to conquer the technical problems. Marius, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
We also have Mr. Terence Corrigan. Terence, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm not doing too bad. No power, but this is Mzansi, and we don't sweat the small stuff.
Exactly. Right. Let's go on to our first story of today. And this is something that's been kind of circulating around in the media now for a few days, and there's a bit of anticipation building up to it. And that is the EFF's National Shutdown, which they have promised will be carried out on the 20th of March, so next week, Monday. The EFF has promised to prevent any business or state function from working on the 20th. And I think I'm correct in saying, although I stand under correction, that SAFTU, the Anti-COSATU Trade Union Federation, has also supported them in this. The EFF has said that the purpose of the national shutdown is to protest, well, everything. High unemployment, education disparity, demand the immediate resignation of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and end load shedding. And it's quite interesting to watch. I've seen there's been quite a lot of talk from the EFF, some of it bordering on quite, shall we say, aggressive rhetoric with regards to whether businesses should operate or not, and that they should close to avoid looting, I think was a thing a senior EFF leader at one point said. There was also, I've seen a whole raft of fake WhatsApp messages going around on like social media, on WhatsApp groups, of people claiming to be someone in the police or something, saying that everyone must stay home on that date. Also, as has been pointed out many times, the EFF has chosen actually quite a clever day for making their national shutdown look more powerful, which is they chose a Monday just before a public holiday. So everyone is very tempted, I think, to take that 4-day weekend. Anyway, in response to this, the DA has created a template affidavit for business owners who feel threatened by the EFF ahead of the national shutdown, and they're putting it, I think, online to allow anyone who says that they have been intimidated by the EFF to essentially write an affidavit and put this out with the aim to lay criminal charges against the EFF should there be any intimidation or damage to public property. The DA has also attacked the EFF for openly stating that they have no intention of applying for permission for their marches, as is required by Section 1 of the Regulation Gatherings Act. So they're obviously trying to turn this into their own political win. The EFF is trying to get some kind of political win out of it. So Marius, let me start with you. Firstly, what exactly is the EFF trying to do here? Why do you think that they went ahead with this march? And do you think it's going to be successful?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's going to be particularly successful. I think the EFF, they've realized their kind of gimmicks they do, storming the president's, platform, whatever, your parliament. People are getting sick of it. And even electorally, the EFF is, I think they're kind of running on the spot at the moment. So, if you look at how they did compared between 2016 and 2021, the overall vote in the country did go up, but they actually went only by about 2 percentage points. But they actually went backwards in places like Joburg and Tshwane. They went backwards by nearly 10 percentage points in Polokwane, which is Julius Maleme's hometown. They went backwards in places like Rustenburg, where they've done very well in 2016, and that's also kind of their core voting areas. A lot of mining and mine workers and so on, who you think would quite like the EFF rhetoric and so on. And there was also a couple of by-elections in KwaZulu-Natal, I think was last week or the week before. There were 4 by-elections altogether in KwaZulu-Natal. 3 were in places that were held by the ANC. In all those 3 wards, the EFF had done pretty well in the 2021 local government election. They got about 20% in each of those wards. But in the by-elections, the EFF lost a significant amount of support. They went down to about 2 or 3%. One of the wards it got actually, I think, just above 1%. So I think they really are starting to lose kind of momentum. Also, if we look at polls that have been coming out, EFF seems to be stuck at between 12 and 15%. So, yeah, and a lot of people who do say they will vote EFF are often people who either aren't registered or they might be registered but aren't actually, such people who aren't necessarily going to go to the polls on voting day. So overall, I think this is just kind of a gimmick by the EFF. But at the same time, this isn't something we should take lightly because, there's obviously nothing wrong with protesting. It's a right in a democratic society. Even if some people are protesting something you disagree with, people should be allowed to. But the issue is that the EFF is saying that people won't be allowed to go to work. They'll stop people going to schools. I saw there was an EFF guy handing out pamphlets at R of Tambo saying planes won't be allowed to take off and land and so on. And, that is not the actions of a political party that should be functioning in a democracy like South Africa. South Africa is also, the EFF has made it clear that they aren't, the biggest fans of representative democracy. And I think this just reflects that the EFF are basically fascists. And I think we should start calling them that. And, a lot of people are saying, or not a lot of people, I saw somebody tweet that maybe this is similar to Mussolini's March on Rome, and I think it was in the early 1920s. I don't think it's anything like that. I think it's going to be much more of a damn squib. And yeah, as I said, I think this is basically a marketing gimmick by the EFF. And look, I think people should probably take the courses on Monday, but overall, I think this is going to be a damn squib. I don't see too much coming out of this.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what the EFF is specifically listed as their aims, that they're protesting high unemployment, education disparity, resignation of Cyril, load shedding. Those are all goals I get behind. But as you say, Marius, it's the nature of this protest. It's sort of aggressive, intimidatory edge, which I think makes it really not fit for the public square. Terence, what are your thoughts on this? I think one of the interesting things here is that, I don't think the EFF really does have the kind of manpower and resources, even if they're backed by like SAF to cause like major disruptions to the country's economy. But on the other hand, we all know the South African police service is not that great at doing its job a lot of the time. And so one wonders, maybe you actually don't have to have that much force in order to force some kind of national shutdown because the cops just won't be able to stop you. I don't know. What's your take on this whole thing?
Look, the EFF is a party whose appeal has been significantly bolstered by the politics of theatrics and symbolism. Gimmicks, as Marius said, and I think this is very much in that kind of in that kind of vein. When it was directed against Jacob Zuma, I think it had somewhat more purchase because there was a great deal of personal animosity towards him, and I think a lot of people found the pay back the money disruptions in Parliament to be, if anything, if nothing else, amusing. Also able to cast themselves as victims when they were ejected by the white shirted security people. But I think there are a couple of other things to consider. First of all, the undercurrent of violence is something that has hung around a great deal of our politics since forever. We forget how bloody something like the security guard strike about 15 years ago turned out to be. I think about 70 people were killed, if memory serves. I think it was a single prosecution. The rhetoric of a lot of political leaders, straddles that divide. I would go a bit beyond what Marius says about their contempt for representative democracy. I think fundamentally their contempt is for constitutionalism. And here, I think one sees an attempt at a populist politics in its true sense, one that says that there are irreconcilable differences. We represent the people, and everyone else represents, someone trying to screw you over, and therefore, by any means necessary. Now, Malema and his coterie have picked that up from the ANC. As I said, there's a rich tradition of violent and counter-constitutional rhetoric that comes out of that side of the aisle, and I think they have simply capitalized on it. And you are quite correct to point to the conduct or lack thereof of the police, when your security the security services just don't really offer much of a deterrent, and a lot of the stuff has just been allowed to stand. There was an instance in Johannesburg, probably I think it was about 2006 or 2007, where SAPS and Metro police officers had an armed standoff on the highway, the one that sort of runs on the bottom end of the CBD, and shots were actually fired, and motorists were literally like hiding under their cars. Not a single person was prosecuted for that. Just the reckless discharge of firearms should at least have got people expelled. In fact, pointing a firearm recklessly is something that should have resulted in at least disciplinary action, which, as far as I know, nothing was ever done. Certainly, no one was prosecuted. And if there's a bit of looting, well, we can sort of write it off as it's just unavoidable and it's only a property crime. Don't worry about that. But there was a court judgment recently, and I can't remember where I saw this, saying that it's actually this is not an optional extra. The police have a duty to enforce the law, not a call on whether this law is okay and this action is condoned at this point. So yes, and I think what we're seeing with the DA drawing up this affidavit and whatever, and I also take note of the strong words coming from the city of Cape Town, from Mayor Hill Lewis. I think this is an assertion of a subnational government, which I've written about in the past, saying, well, if you're going to do this, you're not going to do it on my real estate, and this differentiates my part of the country from yours. And if it turns to anarchy there, well, it's not going to do it. Not going to do so here. And my very best wishes go to him on this.
Nick, can I just quickly read you something from the EFF's own constitution?
Exactly.
So,
go ahead.
Aims and objectives: to capture political and state power through whatever revolutionary means possible to transform the economy for the benefit of all, in particular Africans. This is from the EFF's own constitution. So they've made it clear that they're happy to get state power, not necessarily through the ballot box, but through the barrel of a gun, possibly. And just on that point quickly, I mean, the EFF is not a mass movement. The ANC is still by far the most popular party in South Africa. And I'm not really a violent person, but I think if there was any kind of EFF revolt to overthrow the ANC government, I'd probably be standing on the side with the loyalists of the ANC to fight back against the EFF revolution. So, and I think probably a lot of people feel the same.
Yeah, that's not much of a choice though, but I agree with you on that one. I think, my take on this is that the politics, if there is lawlessness on Monday, then the optics will resound badly on the EFF. If they can do a very strong march that's peaceful and that there's like not much documented intimidation or anything like that, I think it would probably be quite a big win for them. But I wouldn't bet on that. And I think if there is kind of lawlessness, that South Africans, I think it's underestimated how much they hate lawlessness, because we live in it, right? We live in a quite lawless society, and I think that it will backfire quite spectacularly on them if it looks like the EFF is encouraging lawlessness, particularly with the kind of people who vote. Because in my experience, the kind of people who vote, I think this is pretty much reflected in surveys too, are people who tend to support law and order, at least parties that rhetorically say they support law and order. So we'll have to see. I'm sure we'll have much to talk about on either Monday or Tuesday. Well, we won't be here on Tuesday, but on Wednesday. Okay, let's move to our next story now. And this story is kind of interesting because it's in the news every day, and yet we just haven't talked about it. And that's because, in a sense, it's kind of ridiculous and not worth talking about. And that is the ongoing impeachment a trial and related legal activities regarding the suspended public protector Busisizwe Mkhwebane, who is being represented in her impeachment hearing by the EFF's lawyer Dalia Mpofu. And Mkhwebane has also tried a whole bunch of other legal challenges to get various people to recuse themselves, including the DA's only MP, I think, on the impeachment committee, which is kind of silly. I think the chair, she's tried to get them to recuse through a court action, and she also went to the Constitutional Court to get them to throw out the whole thing. And it looks like today her application to the Constitutional Court was simply dismissed, which she responded to by calling it women abuse, and said that she didn't have the money to cover the costs issued by the country's top court. On top of this, we've also seen her lawyer, Dalia Mpofu, really drag out the proceedings and kind of go on a tangent here and a tangent there. The other day, former public protector Thuli Madonsela was testifying, and Dalia Mpofu managed to make a whole bunch of the testimony about her record for some reason, and even made some sort of disparaging remark about her looks, I believe. So one really gets the sense this is all a bit of a kind of dog and pony show, just complete farce. It's not a very serious process. And yet, and at the same time, it looks like the Public Protector's Office has simply become beholden entirely to the presidency, at least in my view. In that Mkhwebane was suspended by President Ramaphosa only after she began to investigate Phala, at which point he was very quick to act on the many reasons to suspend her. So the cynic suggests that this is all being done to elongate the process to, I think, October, when the public protector's term of office ends, at which point the entire impeachment inquiry will be dropped and the ANC will never have had to have made the decision to vote against one of its own, even if it's a rogue member of its own party. Terence, what do you make of the whole saga?
I don't think there's much more to say about it. I think that
Sorry, you were muted at the beginning there, Terence. What did you say?
Oh, well, I said, yes, I agree. I don't think there's a great deal more to be said about that. I think that this is sort of what happens when you politicize institutions, where there's always been a sort of bottomless pit of money, taxpayers' money to fight your legal cases in. And sooner or later, you're always gonna come to a point where the whole edifice became very shaky. Now, the ANC made a clanger about putting Thuli Madonsela in. She actually took the job seriously, and developed a remarkable fan base in South Africa for doing so. And they weren't going to make the same. They weren't going to make the same mistake with Ms. Mkhwebane. And as I recall, the first action when she taking over was to insist all the TVs had to be turned to ANN7. I must say, actually, I quite miss ANN7. I used to find some of the shows entertaining. But yeah, I mean, it was just very revealing of where she stood. And I think that Dalia Mpofu is a very canny political operator, in a courtroom. And I think that he knows exactly what he's doing. I think he's trying to just drag it out as long as long as he can. And I think many in the ANC are quite happy not to actually have to make any decisions. It's like this game of political pass the parcel. You just hope the music doesn't stop when you're actually holding it.
Marius, what's your take on the whole saga? I mean, it's quite interesting, I think, what's happened to public protectors. They weren't really at the forefront of our politics in a lot of ways until Thuli Madonsela and until the Nkandla report. And ever since then, they've sort of taken on this larger role, even as Busisizwe Mkhwebane has time and time again issued reports that have been thrown out in courts all over the place. Do you think the office is going to recover from this?
The office was always, as you say, pretty low key. And the only reason it became quite well known is because Thuli Madonsela was basically just doing her job. She wasn't doing anything amazing. She was doing what the public protector was supposed to do, and stand up against wrongdoing and whatever.
I can't remember the specifics, but I seem to remember that the actual Nkandla report is actually relatively soft on President Zuma.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a lot of people after that, all these calls Thuli Madonsela for president, and she seems like a fairly competent person, but sometimes she tweets some quite, I wouldn't say racially charged, but with some kind of a bit of a racial element. And I believe her daughter was an EFF member. Obviously, not that necessarily reflects on Thuli Madonsela, but it tells you possibly something about views with political views within the family and so on. So I mean, there's obviously Thuli Madonsela, who I do think was a pretty good public protector, but also, as I say, was doing what a job was supposed to do. She just wasn't going above and beyond. She was doing what the public protector was supposed to do. But just on the issue of Busiwe Mkhwebane, as I say, she said this is woman abuse was going on against her in the Constitutional Court. And I just hate this very cynical way people kind of take the language of the social justice left, if you want to call it that, and talk about this. Same as Lori Lightfoot now, the mayor of Chicago, who, if people aren't aware, she's an African-American woman. She looks a bit like if Gollum had grown up in Africa, perhaps, instead of Middle Earth. But yeah, she lost the primary now to become mayor of Chicago, and she said it's because people are racist and sexist. It's probably not true. I mean, the exact same thing happened here in South Africa during COVID. When George Floyd died, our government came out and said, this is terrible, Black Lives Matter, all this kind of thing, while the police of this country were beating people in the street to death sometimes for not following lockdown rules. So, yeah, I just hate this very cynical use of this kind of social justice language, and I think this is also part of it. And while I think Thuli Madonsela definitely did the office proud, I think Mkhwebane has showed that it's not always we're not always going to be setting our best and brightest to become the public protector.
Go ahead, Terence.
If I can just comment on that, a couple of remarks from the archives. I remember that President Ramaphosa went on, did an online statement as head of the ANC about how dreadful white supremacy was, and it's like all over the place. When quizzed about the conduct of the security forces, his remark was, "They let their enthusiasm get the better of them." Just an interesting.
We shouldn't actually even laugh, but because it's disgusting. It's still one of the things that in another country, people not even one person lost their job after Collins.
Yeah, I mean,
in another country would have brought the governments down. Not even one person. And sorry, just to carry, there was also the people when there was inquiry into Collins Causa's death. One of the reasons said no, why they got out of hand was because Collins Causa and his I think it was his brother-in-law was also beaten. Was saying nasty things to the women soldiers. Obviously, you shouldn't say nasty things to women, but that should also not be a death penalty, or it shouldn't be a death sentence.
Right.
And also the same thing. Oh no, they were being, it's horrible, being horrible to women. That's not great. You shouldn't be beaten to death for that.
It's worth, and I think your point there, Marius, is really important about how this effect has how we've grown too soft on this kind of stuff in our politics. Is that I think of Nigeria, where they had this rogue police unit. I think it also, by coincidence, had the acronym SARS, and there were major protests and riots against this in Nigeria, a country which is, I think, generally speaking, institutionally far weaker than South Africa. And I believe there were some results from those. If Nigeria, who has had a much more difficult relationship with their government over the years and a much more authoritarian political environment, is willing to stand up to police brutality, then we certainly should ourselves too.
And they've had civil war, they've had coups, military governments, all kinds of things.
Exactly.
Does anybody even know the names of the people who beat Collins Causa to death?
No, we all know who killed George Floyd. Nobody knows who killed Collins Causa, and probably will never know.
Right.
It's interesting, isn't it? Very interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. All right, let's move on to our last topic for today, and this is from an opinion piece by Jabulani Sikekane, just about some interesting details of how the presidency and the cabinet are working. And I think that this is a really fascinating insight into what's going on in government. The president, as this piece makes the case, has been making lots of hay about how we need a developmental state. The president said very recently, at this moment in our country's history, when we have vast, urgent, and pressing developmental needs, when we have to undo the devastating and enduring legacy of apartheid, we need to have an active and capable developmental state. Okay, sure, fair enough. But while he says this, his administration seems not very keen on holding any of the important meetings that need to happen in order for the government to actually function. About 44% of its meetings last year were cancelled, and particularly what are called these sort of cabinet committee meetings, which are like subgroups within the cabinet that are where most of the work of cabinet gets done. In 2021-2022 annual report, the presidency says that of its 91 committee meetings and 25 cabinet meetings that were scheduled, only 51 took place of the committee meetings, and only 23 took place of the cabinet meetings. So they just seem to have cancelled them left, right, and center. And it really kind of begs the question, what is the president actually doing all day? Marius, let me start with you.
Yeah, well, doesn't seem like he's doing much, does it? And I think it just shows this kind of inertia in the state where nothing much is going on. We saw how long it took for state of disaster regulations to come out, or what actually state of disaster regulations meant around the electricity crisis. The cabinet reshuffle took forever, and I think this is just part of it. And also in that article, it seems that some of the meetings were cancelled because departments didn't have anything to present. I mean, most people listening here, and us sitting here probably know that if you have something to present at a meeting, you better make sure that you have something to present. Otherwise, you're going to get in trouble at work. It seems like there's obviously no consequences for people not doing their work properly. And, but maybe that might be a blessing in disguise. Maybe it's a better thing if we have a government that's sitting on its hands and doing anything. Maybe it's better to have a, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. And government with inertia, rather than that's one that's really working really hard to put in the worst policies of the National Democratic Revolution. Rather have a government which can't even decide when to have a meeting, rather than tomorrow we're going to implement expropriation without compensation.
Terence, you've at times spoken up for at least the idea of the developmental state, but this kind of proves the point that you always make attached to that, which is that, well, we should actually start by having a developmental state if that's the strategy we want to pursue.
Well, there's gradations. You need a functional state, then you can look at a capable state, then you can look at a developmental state. Now, the president seems to vacillate between the two upper level ones. We seem to have missed the foundational, which is the functional state. I've actually, in part because I spent a good couple of years in East Asia. This is an issue of personal interest to me. That I think that if a state is properly capacitated, if it does actually hire your best and brightest, it is a repository for a lot of expertise. It can be very beneficial to driving a developmental agenda. That's generally the way that Japan, South Korea, Taiwan are interpreted. But we don't have that. If you can't keep the lights on, you don't have the requirements for a modern economy. If you can't organize a meeting, you probably aren't attracting the best and brightest. And maybe those people who are smart will go into organizations where meetings do actually take place, or maybe where things actually can get done. I think that South Africa can do this sort of delusionary hubris in a way that probably doesn't exist in many other parts of the world. I've spent a good part of my life traveling around this great continent, and I've seen countries that are far worse off, but no one really takes it serious. Well, the governments there don't really insult people, with pretending that they that they're going to be leading them to the sunlit uplands of prosperity and competence. And sad thing is, on that score, we seem to be going backwards. We can be scathingly critical of a lot of what's happened in South Africa over the last couple of decades, but I think that you'll find very few people who have any memory of it who wouldn't trade the entire cabinet we have for the one we had in 1997, or to have someone like Trevor Manuel back in the cabinet. Just serious people. It's leaves me speechless.
Indeed. I think this is an interesting little data point, because it adds probably more info about what Ramaphosa is like behind the scenes than a lot of other things that one might read. Anyway, we're out of time, so thank you very much for listening. We will be back tomorrow on the show, and I hope that you found us interesting and thoughtful, and we will see you tomorrow. Cheers.